And welcome to Fresh Take. I'm your host, Dan Friedman. You can find me at the Danny Fresh on TikTok and Twitter. We've got a really interesting show, really interesting guests tonight. Cartoonists and illustrators Hannah Kaplan, David Heatley are here with us tonight. We're going to be talking about cartooning and personal narrative. And just a little quick housekeeping before we get to them. I wanted to say that, we launched the channel just a little over a month ago. It feels like a lot longer than that. We've done a lot of content. And part of that is the sort of great response that you guys have given us. As we continue to ramp up, periodically here, we're going to come down for short periods of time so that we can kind of incorporate some changes, continue to make the show better, better experience for you guys, for guests, for myself, hopefully. So after tonight's episode, we're probably going to be down for about 2 weeks and be back later in the month. We are going to return at the end of March for sure. And we're going to get into the return of just the fantastic show Atlanta, which is coming back for season 3. And I'm sure we'll talk about the Moon Knight show as it hits Disney+. And then in early April, if you're a Brandon Sanderson fan, if you're a fantasy novel fan, we're going to have a really special show, some really fantastic guests talking about trauma in fantasy heroes as their story arc, which sounds down, but honestly, the guests are pretty hilarious and have some really fun approaches to the topic. And I really think that's going to be a great show. So that's enough about future programming. We have about 125 subscribers, I believe, on YouTube as right now. I know we've started streaming to Facebook as well, so welcome if you're watching there. When we hit 200 subscribers, we are doing a giveaway, and I've just about narrowed down what that's going to be. I want it to be something actually cool and not just like here's some free stuff, but like something really I think will be fun. And I'm just about there, so that's my promise to you. It'll be something cool. So here's the obligatory subscribe, hit the like. Tell your friends. And with that, let's get into our topic. I want to welcome in Dave Heatley. Hello, Dave. Here to talk
about Dan?
Velvet Cactus Society reunion tour. And Hannah Kaplan. Hey, Hannah.
Hi.
Hey, thanks for joining me, folks. Let me see if I can get a little more space here. There we go. So just full transparency, this is a little bit of home cooking audience here. Hannah is my cousin. Dave is a childhood friend from my hometown, but they're both really excellent artists and really thoughtful people, and I'm really glad that you could both come on, so thank you guys.
It's an honor, Dan Friedman.
Welcome aboard.
Thank you.
Right on. So I want to get into your guys' individual work a little bit and the form a little bit, but just to start really broad here, I do think cartooning is an interesting play. I kind of think it holds like a little bit of a unique place in that it's both seen as the low and the high in a lot of circles, and I think like it's still some people, I would guess most people still think of like their newspaper strips when they think of cartooning, right? Then I think there's the the sort of like Mao's Art Spiegelman really kind of well recognized things, and I think it holds a little bit of like a unique place. So I just want, if you have either one of you have any thoughts about sort of the role that it is in sort of the current art landscape and kind of where you see it fills.
You want to go first, Hannah? I feel like you're more connected to contemporary comics than me, probably. So.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I think it's funny because, like, I think when I tell people that I'm a cartoonist, I feel like I have to gauge what their idea of cartooning is. Like,
right.
Yeah.
Or like, oh, what do you, I make comics. Like, I feel like when people hear that, they could be really, like, they could be like a graphic novel reader and like totally kind of get where I'm coming from. Or they might have like just be thinking of like superheroes or newspaper comics. So I guess it's kind of interesting in that way where like it's like, I don't know, just being an indie cartoonist or whatever, it's kind of like still a little bit, it's not mainstream, but if you're in a certain circle, it's like, oh, there's all these different genres and whatever. So I don't know. I don't know if that answers the question, but that's what I think of.
Yeah.
Any
I mean, I think, I guess my exposure to cartoonists, younger cartoonists now is mostly through Instagram. I feel like there's a pretty thriving Instagram comics scene. But yeah, I mean, I grew up kind of reading comics in the 90s, and it was like a second wave of underground, basically. So it was at least more indie. As indie rock was like a thing, so were indie comics. And I feel like I do feel nostalgic for that time where you went to the comic book store and it would be months in between seeing something new, and when it did, it was like a big event, and really only a few thousand people were buying it, and you just felt like part of a small club. And it was rare in the way that going to a record store, what you bought at a record store was rare. So yeah, the internet's exploded everything. Obviously, it's just like all available all the time, and people can just post anything they want at any time, and it's missing a little something of the specialness. That said, there's like there's some really vibrant, amazing work being made, and still really personal and independent. So
let's talk about the personal, because that's the part that I find, and sort of the headline for the show, and what I've sort of found most interesting about the form, which is, why do you think it lends itself so well to personal narrative over other mediums? Either one of you.
I mean, I'll jump in if you want.
Yeah.
I guess I think because the kind of comics I like are usually written and drawn by the same person. It's not like a team of illustrator, letterer, inker. It's one person. You're getting a direct line from their imagination or their thoughts, like through their hand into the page. And so every letter is a gesture. Every letter is a mark. Every part of a person's face or their body or the background, it's all coming from the same hand. And so I think that there's just like a physical connection that happens when you read a cartoonist's work. It's like, not only do they think of the story and want to tell you this thing with some urgency, they actually inked it down to that page, and it goes directly into your brain when you read it.
Yeah, I think that's well put. And I think just like the nature of it as being something sort of there's an immediacy to it. Like you can take something small, like a small moment, and you can just put it on the page and then it's there. And I think I can't think of another medium that like works quite so well in that. Like you couldn't just write a page and have it be be very compelling necessarily. Where if you have that combination of writing and drawing, you can kind of capture something relatively quickly.
Was that Hannah? Was that as choosing it as a form as opposed to any other form of visual art or any art making? Is that the appeal of it, the ability to kind of capture it as kind of authentically as you're seeing it, or what drew you to it?
I think that's why it works for me in a lot of ways, because I think I think I was drawn to it because I was just reading a lot of comics, and I was reading like people like Gabrielle Bell, who like writes so much of her life. And I think it just, like I think I always had those kind of thoughts in my head where I'm like, oh, this would be like an interesting kind of thing to tell someone about, or to make something about. But, and it sort of did give me this way to just be like, oh, okay, here I can just make it, and it can just be this little thing, and it's still something that I can share. So yeah, I think that is part of the appeal for me.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Hannah, which is that when you discover any medium, your entryway is to have that impact on yourself, like as a reader, and you're looking at this piece of paper, and suddenly it's like, I've heard it talked about like a music score or something, and then suddenly it's playing in your mind, and you're in that world, and you're feeling those feelings that the cartoonist put down on the page, and then you fall, like for me, I just like fell in love with the experience of being told a story in that way, and it was like, oh, I want to do this too. And then the thrill of like this blank page, suddenly my marks are on there, suddenly they make sense, suddenly my story now is captured, someone else is going to read it and have that same experience I had. It's like this beautiful little circle that happens.
How often are you considering audience? Is that an after fact, or is it like do you approach the work with the idea that somebody's going to be reading it?
Mm, I think it's part of the process of making it. It's because I think that's the difference between like if I were to actually be like, writing something down in my journal versus publishing something that's like maybe uses the title like diary, but it's like it's very carefully I'm very carefully deciding what actually goes in there. And that's because I'm imagining that it will be read and I'm thinking of how that comes across and if it's like funny or interesting.
Yeah. I think of it as like, your internal editor is your approximation of what someone else who's not you might feel reading this thing. And so a big skill and as a writer, any kind of writer, but especially as a cartoonist, is to be able to like keep showing up to the page and read it as if you're not the person who made it, and then edit it with that in mind. And how would this get closer to being the thing I want someone to feel? And George Saunders has this great book about these Russian master short story writers, and he kind of talks about that process. And he's like, he thinks that's the whole ball game. Like, you're going to start with a terrible version of the thing you want to make, and then you're going to revise it until it's as good as it can be, and then you're done. It's revising. So
It's interesting mentioning editing, because there was one thing I was thinking about. Obviously, when your source material is your life, and that life is ongoing until it's not, but certainly you are your own content editor in that way. How do you know when to stop and start the access to what you're giving somebody in? How do you know what elements to pull out of your life, or how do you approach that process?
there we go.
Let me give it a more specific context, Hannah. Maybe this will help answer it more directly. So you talked about the diary piece, right? And so you had a piece that it was the 2011, I don't know how it's titled appropriately, 2011, 2021 diary, where you essentially took a day every year, but in each decade. So it was January 1, 2011, January 1, 2021, right?
Yeah, it was
Did
a
you say that
month
right?
from January in 2011 and a month in
Right.
2020.
Sorry, a month from. And so you revisit essentially a snapshot from each one of those days, right? So why that format? What were you trying to get at there? What was that process? How did you select the moment?
Well, I had like this material that I was working from, which was the comics that I had made in 2011. So
Right.
in a sense, it was like actually extremely limited. It was actually an extremely like confined project in that way, where I was like, I took one panel from these comics I made in 2011, and then I drew a comic from that day, one panel only, which is pretty small considering I have like a whole day to work with. But I was trying to have a connection between the comic 10 years earlier. So whether the connection was like, sometimes I would do it like just sort of in the visual like composition of the panel, and other times it would be more about the content. But I tried to maintain some connection between them, whether it was like a contrast or a similarity. So that provided a lot of structure for that project. And I don't know. And when I was doing it, I was also like, this is like a very particular, like, I'm just like having a conversation with myself. So it did feel very like sort of internal in that way, where I was like, this is kind of just a thing I'm doing for me. But I did enjoy sharing it. And I feel like, people responded to it some. So yeah.
That's awesome.
I mean,
I've always wanted to do a strip like that, where like I draw a few panels and then put it in the drawer for like 3 years, and then draw another panel. It's like one of those exquisite corpse, like pass it to the artist, but you're passing it to yourself in the future. That sounds really cool, though.
Yeah.
Did you go to art school? Did you study like art?
I went to Oberlin and I was an art major, and then I went to the Center for Cartoon Studies in Vermont and did an essay there.
Okay. Yeah, because I think we probably have a similar art making approach to comics, which isn't always the case, because it sounds like what you're talking about is almost designing a game for yourself, or just putting a conceptual box around something and then working from that. And I definitely have done that too. It's like, okay, I'm gonna like talk about every sexual experience from kindergarten through marriage. That's the box around it. Now go, you know. And then I think of like a lot of performance artists, or I don't know, so even someone like Saul LeWitt or something. These, you make instructions for yourself, or you trick yourself into creating something with as a game, or as a format that you design consciously.
Yeah. I feel like I almost like need something like that. Otherwise I'll just feel like I'm totally, it could be anything. I could make anything. I could work all day, or I could not work at all, so I do find that doing something like that is just helpful to.
I think one of the I think this crosses many art mediums, but like I think one of the most generally understood things about the like generative artists is like they need complete freedom, and the reality is like complete freedom is harder, right? Like without a sense of structure, without some boundary, even if the choice you eventually make is to break the boundary, you want to have some structure, regulation. And I think that's true if you're creating performance work, if you're drawing, writing, whatever. You need to give yourself that kind of something to kind of root it. Do you agree with that?
Oh yeah, for sure.
So and because Dave, you already touched on it, and I was going to get to it a little bit later, but both of you are either, maybe very comfortable is too strong a word, either very comfortable or very willing to be really honest about all sorts of intimate aspects of your life, sexual aspects, relationship aspects, health aspects. I really admire that about both your work. Did you have to get to that place? Do you have to push yourself to that place? How do you decide what is off limits? Like, why do you think that is an important kind of feature of both your work?
You want to go first?
Sure. I mean, so I've definitely had people say like, how do you write about this stuff? You're so brave. And I don't feel like I'm a brave person. I just feel like I'm missing the filter that would like stop me from sharing that thing. So it doesn't feel like a virtue always. Sometimes it's just like oversharing, or just not having great boundaries or something. But I mean, I've definitely tried to use that to my advantage. And I would say, like, in the way that I was saying, you discover someone's work and you enjoy the experience of that. Like, I love squirming reading, let's say, Julie Doucet's comics about her dreams, which are about like, some guys severing some guy's penis and eating it or something. It's just, and she somehow makes that like cute and funny. Like, so I love the experience of that. And it's like, oh yeah, what can I contribute to this conversation? And the other thing is, I had a writing teacher in art school who was like, what are you risking? Why should I read this? Like, what are you risking as the artist? Why should I invest in this? And it's always struck me, like, you have to risk everything. Like, if you're not uncomfortable making it, and you're not squirming, drawing it, thinking like, oh my God, someone's gonna read this, why would someone else feel anything? That's kind of my attitude about it.
Yeah, I definitely relate to that feeling. I hate when people say that I'm like brave or something. I'm like, I don't know. I don't think of it that way at all, but I think I think it's kind of like what you said, where it's like it's natural for me to share, and if there's something that's not natural for me to share, I probably wouldn't share it. There's so much that isn't out there also. But I think for me, it's more like it was more of a natural thing to write about myself. And in some ways I think I've like gotten more concerned with what I put out about myself as time has gone on, or I've had sort of ups and downs. I think it can be harder in some ways to think about actually people that know me reading it than strangers. So that's something that I've struggled with a bit, is like, I'm fine to have like everyone in the world know, except for like,
I disassociate from our relationship when I, just so you know, like I disassociate from our relationship when I read your work. Just so you know.
Love it. Love it. That's what I would please like everyone to do. And so that's like that. I think that's been kind of hard for me in some ways. And then the other thing that's come up for me is like other people's reactions to being shared in being in my work, which is at first I felt like all my friends were like, this is fun. And then I have encountered people who really didn't want to be in it or didn't want to have certain things about them shared in it. So I've had to sort of integrate that also. And then I think, what else was I going to say? I don't know. I guess I was thinking about, I don't know if I feel that like I have to risk everything. I don't know if I approach it that strongly, but one thing that I do try to do is like, I kind of think of like, if I am including other people in my work, like I still always have to be like the most vulnerable character, if that makes sense, because I don't want to feel like I'm using anyone else. Like I'm really using my own experience and that's what I have to work with. So even if there's other people included, I try to not make it so much about them unless they gave me permission, but usually not.
Yeah, I'm thinking as you're talking, well, Dan, your question, like, how do you decide what not to include? And it's like, Rebecca, my wife, helps with that. She's just like, no, you can't write about that. And it's a negotiation. It's a negotiation. But I mean, my parents, I feel like, are fair game. Like I didn't choose them. I was stuck with them, and I got handed down a lot of stuff that I need to hand back in some ways and tell my version of. So, but like my first book came out, I did this excruciating thing where I like shared it with my mom before it was published, and like we talked about it all, and it was like so gross, and like I just would never do that again. And so 10 years later, my second book came out, and I was just like, Mom, I have this book coming out. There's some unflattering stuff about you in it. There's some loving stuff about you in it. I don't know if you're going to read it. I don't want to hear if you've read it. It's up to you. We're not going to talk about it. Like I just, we talked about some of the content in it before it was published. I didn't show her anything though. And we still to this day have not talked about whether she's bought it and read it. And I'm totally good with that. I don't need to know. And with my brother and my dad, I'd say the same thing. And they were like, yeah, I don't think I'm going to read it. I was like, great. So.
Right.
Yeah.
It's something you said. Oh, so you've also both had pieces where you've chronicled your own chronicling, like writing about being stuck on writing about the self-consciousness of like, am I actually like, why am I making myself so important? That feeling. It's my question. It's not really like, how do you work through it? It's like, what's the question I want to ask? Is it, there's a narcissistic aspect, right, to self-chronicling. How do you how often are you just working through it? I guess that's my question. Are you like, do you separate out like, oh, this is a fucking thing I just need to work out, versus no, this is something that makes content that I think somebody will enjoy?
I guess I feel like if it's not something that's complicated or for me, then it's probably not going to be that interesting, maybe. So I feel like they're not like totally separate, but like, yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I have a fully formed thought. Do you have anything?
Well, I feel like narcissism is my subject matter. So yeah, I could talk about this a lot.
Yeah, often.
I mean, I go to a Jungian therapist. I believe I have what's called like narcissistic injury from having narcissistic parents and, my own narcissistic tendencies. So that is probably what led me to write and draw about myself all the time, is that narcissistic streak. But if you use that as a portal into understanding it and hopefully point the way out to other people by laughing at yourself, I feel like there's something really healing that can happen there. And like Hannah was saying, I always have to be the most vulnerable character. I have to be the butt of all the jokes. It's not about sneering at other people. It's really about like, in some ways you can have all this regret in your life, but if you're not a biographical cartoonist, you're like, oh, I can fuck up for the rest of my life and be an idiot, and I'll always have material. So you can kind of forgive yourself. It's like, something good could come out of it. I can laugh at it. Other people can laugh at it. So yeah, I mean, I think, but I think all artists are a little narcissistic. To be able to create, you have to kind of think what's happening in your head is the most interesting in the world, at least sometimes, and you're very in that bubble. So there's a healthy kind of narcissism, and then there's the like, toxic narcissism that's like dangerous and scary and hurtful to people. And I think hopefully mine's a little more benign than that.
That idea that you have something either unique or insightful to say about a universal topic, and that sharing that is both important to you and important to the audience, takes a certain amount of ego and self-focus. That's true, I think, across all things. Dave, you are active in many art forms. How do you decide, oh, this thing's a song, this thing's an art piece? This, like, how do you is it organic? Do you divvy it up? Like, what's that about?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely am very much called to work on certain things. Like, songs like appear in my dreams, or just while I'm walking down the street or something, they kind of like nag at me like a little kid, like, here, I want your attention. So yeah, a lot of times I'll just capture like the idea for a song, and I might not be able to get to it yet. And then it's just about the practicality of like how many hours do I have in the day, and what do I feel like working on that day. So I might have 10 songs in various, half written states, and I'll look through, like, none of them are speaking to me. I don't want to work on any of this stuff. And then I go and I open my computer, or I go to my drafting table, and it's like there's some half written comic strip, and it's like, that excites me for today, I'm going to work on that. So it's usually just following my own kind of intuition and excitement. But yeah, the ideas are sort of always coming in, and you just have to like kind of grab the little pieces of them as you get them, and file them away to work on later.
How often, in either one of you, but how often are you like pre-planned versus I'm just throwing shit on paper and like I just need to get some stuff out of my brain, let's see what it is?
I think for me, it's like the structure is so important. So it's like, if I have some structure that I'm working from, then I'm like, okay, it's time to sit down and do it. And if I don't, I don't know, I'll just be kind of, I might just be putting random things down. I don't know. I mean, I've been trying to work on something that is more structured and longer, and it's been very hard for me. So it's hard for me to plan much like ahead, I guess, naturally.
But what does that look like? How much planning do you do? Like, are you just making little notes and then drawing pretty quickly, or how does that look?
I guess, I like work from like I usually work from like words first, which I feel like maybe is not that common for cartoonists, but I usually, so it would be usually notes, and then rough sketches, and then more complete sketches, and more just kind of figuring out how that all fits together, or cutting things out. But that's why I find it hard to work longer, because it's like when I have a page, it's easy to be like, oh yeah, it's like you're sort of composing something, and you kind of can have a sense of when it's complete or when it feels like it's working. So with something longer, I'll just be like, well, I don't know, it's so unwieldy. It's hard for me to, because you can't do with comics, editing is like a whole tricky thing. I find that a little bit difficult. But you've written some really long books. I looked at your website. It looks like you've written some long graphic memoirs. So
yeah, this last book was like 430 pages or something. But and the first one was like 128, but some of the pages had like 48 panels, and it was a lot of. I mean, each one took like 5 or 6 years. But I would say, I've heard some people say like this whole graphic novel thing is really an unnatural version of comics. I don't know that I totally believe that, but there's some argument to it that like comics in their most pure form are these little short bursts of narrative, or like haikus or poems. Like, they're not meant to be like page after page of reading. I mean, Mouse, I think, does it incredibly successfully. Some other books do too, but it is kind of unnatural to the the basic root of comics, which are just like doodle, quick idea, move to the next. So if you could like trick yourself into doing like lots of little pieces that add up to a book, I feel like that's the solution to do a longer thing sometimes.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's what I think has to be the solution.
The comic book panel, in the more like traditional comic book sense, also is visually, I think, doing something a little bit different in that it's trying to bridge the gap essentially between like the book and a movie almost. So like you're trying to catch action transition. And I think that's less of value in the way that you guys are creating work, right? You're not like trying to catch the motion between panels usually, unless you're using it for something to stand outside of what you're doing. Is that fair?
Right. Yeah. I know what you mean. Like if you're looking at like a superhero comic or something, it's all about getting that movement and that action. And no, like I think that if in like an autobiographical comic, like if some of that stuff is integrated, I think it can add a lot of interest to it. I don't think that they're like have to be totally mutually exclusive, but I would say that's not like the focus definitely when I'm working.
Yeah, that's true too for me. I think the stereotype of the like, especially the male cartoonist, let's say, is someone who like really fetishizes all their brushes and inks and wants to show off their drawing skills and just like these fabulous splash pages and stuff. And I just couldn't be less interested in that in my own work. I appreciate people who do that well, but yeah, I'm kind of trying to strip everything down to its like barest gesture to get the emotion across. And it's like if the writing's not good, I just don't care how good the art is. I don't want to read it, So
that's how I feel.
I have a question for guys. My mom has a question. Jean Freeman wants to know. Do you guys have work that you're particularly pleased with? Is there something that stands above or stands to the side in your careers? Babies, right? Picking babies.
I don't know if there's anything especially that does. I mean, I think I'll look back at old work and I'll pick something up and be like, "Oh, this is actually really funny," or other times I'll pick something up and be like, "This is so dumb." But I don't know. Like, there's not something that really stands out for me.
So my first book really makes me cringe and is written by a very different person than I am now. The book I finished that came out a couple years ago, I still feel like it's too long and I wasn't able to like rein it in enough. So I have problems with both, but there's one little book I made called Amy. Dan, you might know the subject of this comic. And I feel really proud of how that came out because it was like just long enough to be kind of a juicy statement about, unrequited middle school love and how that haunts you your whole life. And it's drawn very sparely. I feel like I didn't do too much on any of it. It just kind of had the right amount. And yeah, I feel like that stands out among the other books as being pretty successful. I feel happy with it.
Are there any who's
Oh wait, there's a question from my mom now. No, I'm kidding.
It's like I read it, David.
All of our moms are gonna write it.
What's who are artists that are there? Let me try that all over again. Are there artists that are working today that are influencing your work currently, or just people you're digging that are doing interesting stuff that you might want to tell an audience about that may not know about their work? You're like, I only like my own shit.
No, I don't know. I feel like I do like really like particular things. Like I mentioned Gabrielle Bell already. She's like, I just really like her stuff. She has a Patreon that's really good. Hop on the Patreon for Gabrielle Bell. I've been enjoying like Tara Booth. She's kind of big on Instagram.
I love Tara Booth stuff.
Her stuff is just very like, I don't know, it's different than other autobiographical stuff. It's very, very visual. It's very colorful and like rich in that way. And she just has she's so good at drawing things like, it looks to me really quickly and just still has like a lot of depth and like emotion to it. I don't know. I really like my friend Anna McGlynn's work.
Promote your friends. Promote your friends.
What?
Nothing wrong. Promote your friends.
Yeah,
promote your friends. There's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, I know her work. She's great. Yeah.
How about you?
I think the person that came to mind is Heather Lose. She goes by Heather of Love on Instagram. Her drawings just like absolutely crack me up. She's a total like super spirit of the underground coming through to the younger generation. It makes me really happy. And she's very kind of like punk. And where I'm actually collaborating with her on like an animated music video that she's doing all the drawings for. So I feel like really into her stuff right now for sure.
Cool.
Yeah.
It's funny. So something that I didn't anticipate that you've both mentioned regularly is that there essentially is like a very like current modern scene on Instagram, right? Of people sharing work and things like that. And I'm totally ignorant to it, right? Like I have no access point to it. I'm going to go like probably deep dive after this and learn about it, which is great. It's one of the reasons I'm doing this show is that I want to kind of like cross-reference streams of people who are interested in interesting things and find new stuff. I wonder, it does echo though something that's come up on previous episodes, which is, you know, there's this, the internet has brought us, like everything, the internet has brought us a lot of upsides and downsides, you know, flip sides of the same coin, where it's much harder now, I think, to get some kind of crossover audience for things, but much easier to find audiences specifically interested in the kind of work you're creating. Is that what you're finding to be true in your lives? Or forget about your lives, but you're seeing to be true in work that's out there?
I don't know if I have like a reference point for something else. Like, I honestly,
right.
like,
You're in it, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like I don't have any insight.
I guess I would just say I don't feel at all like a successful cartoonist. I mean, I've had a couple books published. I have like less than 2,000 followers on Instagram. The people who regularly read my stuff are maybe like a couple hundred. Of those, the people who comment are like 12 or something. I'm not one of these cartoonists with like 900,000 followers with thousands of comments. So yeah, I don't really know what that looks like. But I also know, like, I don't know. I'm trying to just sort of appreciate, you know, who is drawn to my work. And a lot of times, like, I'm fans of their stuff too. And there's an actual authentic connection going on between me. It feels like a one-on-one thing rather than like this faceless, you know, I'm one-way stream of communication where I never even know who you are and you just comment. And, you know, so, you know, maybe I'm just talking myself into why there's some merits to that, because I'm just like, you know, of course I'd love to be more successful, but there is something to that. I do feel like there's this nice intimacy in it. And I feel like the quality of the people who like my stuff is very high. I'm very impressed with the people who do wind up on my page. And
you're impressed with the people who like you?
Because they're impressive. Like, it's cool. It's like, yeah.
No, but that's kind of what I mean, right? Yeah. Like that we're getting further divisions into you know, I don't want to get, this is gonna sound more negative than I mean it. It's like more like-minded people talking to each other, because that's the problematic aspect of it. But I mean, people who want to engage in discourse around certain types of art, certain conversational topics, for certain respond to different creative impulses, can sort of find and access that a little bit more directly, and the sort of the point of entry, like you're saying, like where you may not consider yourself a successful cartoonist by any means, but somebody who's really drawn to your work might think of it that way, and you're saying, well, I think their work's really cool, right? So fine, it's mutual admiration society, but that's the idea, right? So you get into those dialogues, and I think that is actually kind of thriving, even if there, I think, is more of it's much harder to obtain the really huge followings, because there's so much content, there's so much access to stuff so fabricated. And like, I think we're seeing that in certainly in music, we're seeing that certainly in you'll see it more in sort of like whatever traditional print comics, like that there's more stuff than ever. Print runs are smaller, but the people that love a certain comic are rabid about that particular comic, and that's sort of a trend line I've noticed.
That makes sense.
Yeah,
I definitely can see that.
I think that's what I've got for you guys. I appreciate your time, and I think this has been informative, and I want to thank you both for coming on.
Yeah,
and
pleasure.
Thanks, audience out there. Thanks, Gene Friedman. All right, have a good night, guys. Appreciate it.
See you later.